since this morning. Right, so my name is Professor Romila Mohi. I am the moderator for this session. I am the Higher Education Commissioner in Mauritius, and a very nice topic which we've been following up in the former session. So I'll try to, divide the questions so that we are sure we are not repeating whatever we've heard in the former one. Right, what is not working? Donc je parle en français? Parce que tu vas parler en français, Abdou?
Oui.
Okay, so translation. Can we have the technical team? Shem, can you please check with the technical team whether they can translate?
One for English, two for French.
Now, we are time locked, which means that we've got to finish in 45 minutes or even 30 minutes. Professor Bajan, at what time should we be finishing this session?
6:45 around.
Okay, 30 minutes. I'm very sorry you have only 30 minutes for this session, but of course you can discuss with the expert at a later stage. So I'm going to really rush and run. We have a team of experts that will be answering a couple of questions. And prior to that, I would just like to give a quick overview. I think we've heard since yesterday and even this morning, we've heard how higher education is crucial. We've heard that at CCM, we've heard that at CHOGM, we've heard that at the World Higher Education Conference in Barcelona, we've heard that at the Transforming Education Summit in New York, we are hearing that at the ADEA and many, many other forums that I'm not mentioning. I believe that the message is very, very clear. In front of having so many uncertainties and complexities, we have had the post-COVID, we have had the COVID, we have external economic shocks, we have climate-related shocks. Higher education is really in a big turmoil. And to really cut it short, the theme of this afternoon is reimagining higher education and research. And I would like to be a bit provocative before I leave the floor to the expert. How are we reimagining higher education in the near future? In the near future, I mean in the next 10 years, 2030, 2040, 2050. Are we talking about a higher education for basic education, like our Honorable VPM said this morning? Are we talking about a higher education that will respond to human capital development? Are we talking about a higher education that will respond to the Sustainable Development Goals? Or a technological higher education, mostly virtual online providers, and no brick-and-mortar university? Or are we talking about a highly skilled higher education? We've always been talking about academics being really too academic and not having enough skills. Are we talking about a green higher education? What are the scenarios you are talking about? Or a free higher education, like the case as you heard in Mauritius? Or are we talking about a for-profit higher education, like the private sector? So you see, there's a lot of scenarios in front of us, and the choice is ours. It will probably be a mix of many of them. But the important point I want to make is that if now we do not start thinking and planning towards what we would want to see in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, then I think it will be a chaotic higher education. With these words, I would like to leave the floor to the expert of this session, who is Professor Kiran Bajan. He has given me a short brief of 1 page. Obviously, we don't want to stay here until 6 p.m. So he's the director of the Tertiary Education and Scientific Research Division at the Ministry of Education. Also a colleague who works very closely with the Higher Education Commission in Mauritius, and we are trying to address a number of reforms, a number of new things, and I leave the floor to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, Professor Mohi. You started in the right direction of saying, let's be provocative, so I cannot be disrespectful to you. Let me continue being provocative. Ladies and gentlemen, I've drafted something quickly because I was not free this morning. I've drafted something quickly that I wanted to talk to you, and it's about impactful research, nurturing and managing. When we are where we are now, after COVID, we realize that it is becoming more and more difficult to secure funding for research. And Mauritius is not different. Mauritius had a dedicated fund started only in 2017, dedicated fund by the Ministry of Finance. In 2017, where the public universities, under the aegis of the Higher Education Commission, was given a kitty of 50 million rupees, which is roughly about $1.5 million. It's not a big amount. We've plans that would be increased threefold to reach 150 million rupees in 3 years' time. However, 3 years later, what we saw was that these funds, instead of reaching 150 million rupees, was reduced to 15 million rupees. That is, instead of being increased 3 times, was reduced 3 times. So what happened? If we have to do some kind of a post-mortem analysis of that, what went wrong? And we did sit down together and found out, and I would just like to share with you, because obviously we cannot say everything is because of COVID. What went wrong was, first, when discussing with the Ministry of Finance, they said there was a lack of impactful research. They said that whatever research you're doing, it had neither the ambition to solve a societal problem nor a direct practical impact. Because I quoted that, this is what we got as an answer, saying that people cannot and should not be doing research for the purpose of publishing a paper, full stop. It has to be for doing something else. And that something else has to be to do impact, has to be for the improvement of society. And the second thing that they said was that, and my apologies to Professor Moi before I say this sentence, was they said it could be that the funding agency was living in an ivory tower because with a disjointed view of local realities, with the expectations that they had of research that they were going to fund being too high compared to what the researchers on the local market could do. And as a result, projects were not funded. Even though you had 50 million, projects were not funded. And when next year on you go back to the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Finance looks at it from the perspective that you've been given a kitty and you've spent only 1/3 of that, which means that you did not need the other 2/3 of it. And so what they do, they come and they cut the budget. So what do we do out of this? What would be solutions out of that? There is a need for, according to me, to have capacity building. Capacity building in terms of first identifying what are priority areas. And I'm here overlapping with the previous session because somebody said we as African continent did not do enough of research on COVID. But the question that I ask is, we have so less resources as compared to the rest of the world. Should we have squandered that resources on COVID, or should we have left COVID to the others and concentrated on priority areas for us, which could be malaria or Ebola or something else which is more of an African nature and not of a general nature? So should we first do impactful research, but after having had an analysis or an identification of what are priority areas? Secondly, there is a need as well when we talk of impactful research to dissuade what I call the mafia of mass publication. I've seen an example recently where one person from an institution has published and has claimed to have published 60 articles in a year. And all of them, once we start going through that list, has been done with 10 other people. So basically, it's just like we do mass social media marketing. This one was social media publication. 10 people coming together. Each one writes a paper, but all 10 names are published there. And I call this a mafia because it is not really research being done. There is no real impact on that. Then there is this element of improvement of research, improve management of research funding. We agree that money is a rare commodity and we need to use it judiciously. And for that to happen, we need to ensure that our colleague researchers realize that it is not just enough to submit a research proposal, convince a panel, and receive the money. It is also needed for them to show accountability towards the funding agency, to show accountability towards the timelines, towards the guidelines, towards the deliverables that they said were there as part of their research proposal. And how do we do that? Maybe there's a need for a dynamic dashboard of all funded projects. I used to have a project management background, and I was tempted to say a dashboard along with some earned value management system to check whether whatever you have is meeting the original plans. Therefore, overall, I would feel that there has to be a realignment between lowering the expectation to ensure that when we are doing research and we are nurturing research, it should not be only at the benefit of the elite, one or two or few, but also to ensure that we can do capacity building of those who are not yet or who have not yet reached the ability to create impactful research. So there's a need to have a spectrum of funding, a spectrum of research done. And I will leave you with that sentence, Professor Moi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bajan. I think Professor Bajan has touched up a very, very important and sensitive point. And I'll just have a very quick answer before leaving our good friend, Mr. Ogutu, to provide the policymaker response. I would say yes, we do need relevant and impactful research in priority areas because we really do not have the resources to have that enlarged base. And definitely we need research that would be relevant to our own context to be able to go further for that. And we have introduced at the Commission the whole concept of research for impact. And this is something that we are pushing with our academics because when we started talking about that, people were thinking we were talking about publishing in impactful journals. No, we do not mean that at all. We mean research for impact, and we have put 6 categories: impact on the community, impact on driving policy, impact for knowledge, impact for capacity building, impact as per the SDGs. So we can discuss later about that. Without further ado, I now ask Mr. Ogutu. We do have 2 other experts that we will ask them to intervene at a later stage after listening to Mr. Ogutu. And I will also ask them, when they start talking, I'll be handing over a few questions, and if they could introduce themselves. Mr. Ogutu.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I think we build up on what we were discussing earlier. We've been pushing governments to allocate at least 15 to 20% of their budgets to education. In Kenya, we are allocating 25.9% to education. But then when you analyze what is the impact of that allocation to education and in which sector does it impact most, are we able to account for that allocation to education? And when you talk about higher education, and I like the idea of highly skilled higher education and higher education as a public good. As governments, we cannot escape the fact that highly skilled manpower is something that we aspire for. And therefore, education as a public good will mean that we continue as governments to finance education and therefore higher education. But the question is, do we continue with the same model of financing? Or do we come up with innovative financing models? We've tried different models in Kenya. We are still trying. So what trick do we do? What is the miracle in financing higher education? And we are now grappling with the issue of differentiated higher education financing. So that once you identify the country priorities, then are you able to put in resources to the higher education institutions to train for the country, to train for economic development. And I'll give an example. Currently, the government has decided to allow GMOs in Kenya, genetically modified organisms. And there's a huge debate on whether the genetically modified foods are safe for our country. And the people who are carrying on this research, policymakers as well as scholars, our researchers. But what does research tell us? On the contrary, there are those who are saying then we are losing our own African varieties, African seeds. We are giving in to the multinationals that are going to be the ones to sell you their seeds. They're the ones who sell you their fertilizer and several other consequences. What do we do? Yet we want to enhance agricultural productivity. But my position is that we need to trust our own. We need to trust our own researchers, and we need to give them the responsibility to think and give us solutions. Because we cannot rely on others to think for us. We've got to trust the best that we have. I say the best that we have because normally when we have an issue, we go to the same higher education institution to hire consultants, assign them responsibility to carry out research. Why don't we trust them? Why don't we trust them to give us solutions? Why don't we make them accountable for what they come up with? And why don't we make our research and development efficient to serve our countries? And why don't we make it relevant? Because then we can finance. And if we are financing it, we can dictate how this outcome works out for us. And the key requirements for African countries, in my view, energy. Can we get cheap energy that will be able to fuel industrialization? The more energy continues being expensive, then we continue incurring more costs. So can our researchers in the higher education sector ensure that our countries revert to cheaper energy? Then what about food security? The whole issue of GMO is looking at food security, but how do we go for food security, sustainable food security? And lots of research have been done in our various higher education institutions, in our centers of excellence. And they're coming up with good proposals. But who is scaling them up? Government has to step in and scale up what they're coming up with. Example is tissue culture, seeds that have been produced from various varieties. But we are not able to scale. Therefore, we cannot benefit from the results. We're not able to leapfrog using the research outcomes that have come up. Then there is infrastructure. For how long do we rely on others to do our own infrastructure? Interestingly, Kenyan experts will be doing infrastructure in Asia, in Europe, but back home, we are turning east to China to do our infrastructure. We are turning north to the US or to Europe to do our infrastructure. Why don't we trust our own? If others can trust them, why are we not trusting them with the responsibility at hand? Then there is the whole issue of advancement in technology. Artificial intelligence. Professor talked about AI earlier. Dr. Martha talked about making agriculture trendy. There was a citizen, a young lady in Zambia, who told the food organization, FAO, that the more and more they put pictures of elderly farmers in pamphlets and brochures, the more the youth stay away from agriculture. And if agriculture is going to spur us to develop, then you must make it trendy. We are developing technologies where drones are used to irrigate and spray crops, but we don't have it. We still have this old man or old woman with a torn hat in the shamba toiling. We haven't made technology and related it to agricultural production so that the youth can look at how they apply AI into agriculture and get productivity. Then the whole issue of machine learning. I talked about blockchain technology and what Profit, it was, I don't know that it was you or earlier who talked about data. What does the data tell us? Can we trust our data? If we are able to trust our own scholars, and if we are able to trust the data that we generate, then we can track our progress. And Madam Chair, I believe African governments are turning a new leaf. We are looking at possibilities of African-led, South-to-South cooperation. I would rather cooperate with Mauritius in comparison. It's closer, it's just 3.5 hours away from Nairobi, as opposed to maybe 16 hours traveling to the US. It's easier for me to engage with Prof on key issues that they can relate with us and we can relate to them. How do we make this happen? And I hope through ADEA and other African Union initiatives, we can bring ourselves together and build resources. We can build synergies to ensure that Africa works for Africa. And I love the idea of higher education for basic education. All these issues we talk about transformation, transforming education. These scholars in higher education are doing this research for others, but how can we plow it back into basic education so that the person coming through to higher education has already gotten the effect of the research that has been done in higher education. And I want to submit, Madam Chair, from where I sit, the future looks bright, but we've got to take action. We've got to trust our own experts and hopefully put our resources where our trust is. Thank you.
Thank you very much for providing this insight. I think since this morning, this message is very clear that we've got to share, we've got to have South-South collaboration in research and training, etc. And this really then brings me to another question that I would like to ask our two experts. There is Mr. Abdou La Tessissé, coordinateur administratif et technique from Senegal. And we have Dr. Lucy Hedy, Education for Sub-Saharan Africa. There are so many issues that he has been provoking us with, which definitely calls for something which we have started for a couple of months now, which is mobility of researchers and mobility of higher education across Africa. If we want to have South-South collaboration, we should be encouraging this kind of mobility. And unfortunately, we do not yet have the instruments. As always, we have started with conventions. We have the Addis Convention. We have the Global Convention for Recognition of Qualifications. Even in the Addis Convention, I've been following that for some time and had a talk at Barcelona. Only 17 countries have ratified the Addis Convention. So do we really need what we are saying? Are we really ready for that? Or is it just going to be like talking about us sharing, having collaboration, and then when countries at the highest level are not ratifying the conventions, so then how do we expect that there will be actions? It will stay as a declaration. It will stay as a convention, very nice on paper. Right, for this I will ask, I don't know whether Dr. Lucy wants to take it first, or is it Mr. Cissé who? Okay. So our policymaker wants to say something before. I have to give him the floor. But let me ask the question. How can we improve quality assurance and harmonization of qualifications to enhance free labor and skills movement across the continent? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to give an example of success stories. Within the East African community, we have adopted the free movement of services and labor. Free movement of services and labor. And this is through the mutual recognition of qualifications in the partner states within the East African community. And now, through the Inter-University Council of East Africa, we have a common higher education area in the East African community. And I believe that is just an example of what can happen. And now the East African community is from Kenya all the way to DRC, Indian Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean. We have Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, all in one association. And it's just a demonstration. If we could link up with the South African Consortium and we link up with the COAS, then we have within Africa a common higher education area and mutually recognized qualifications from each country. And then that will enhance free movement of labor, free movement of services, and maybe a common market, which is what we are pushing for at the African Union. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Abdou?
Merci beaucoup. Je pense que c'est une question importante. Peut-être je vais laisser le temps aux autres de mettre leur masque. Donc, pour cette question de réimaginer l'enseignement supérieur et la recherche, l'angle que nous aurons abordé, nous, ce sera l'angle de l'assurance qualité. Nous pensons que toutes ces questions qu'on se pose ont une finalité. La finalité, c'est construire une Afrique prospère qui s'inscrit dans un développement durable où la mobilité professionnelle et académique est facilitée. Tout ceci doit être pris en compte par l'ensemble des parties prenantes. Et c'est ce que l'assurance qualité est en train de faire depuis quelques années. Si nous regardons un peu le contexte au niveau africain, donc les bases ont été jetées par l'Union africaine à travers son programme PACAF qui permet un peu de construire cet espace d'assurance qualité harmonisé au niveau africain. Et dans cet instrument qui est le PACAF, vous avez des instruments normatifs comme la Convention d'Addis Abeba avec l'UNESCO, dont le pilier fondamental est l'assurance qualité, mais vous avez aussi d'autres instruments et d'autres outils qui sont mis à la disposition des institutions d'enseignement supérieur, des agences nationales des pays pour aller vers un enseignement de qualité, mais aussi vers une harmonisation de nos pratiques et de nos normes. Je vais citer juste l'exemple des lignes directrices et normes que nous avons développées au niveau africain, les AEG-QE, qui sont des normes pour les institutions d'enseignement supérieur, mais des normes pour les agences, mais aussi des normes pour effectuer une évaluation respectant les bonnes pratiques en vue d'impulser la qualité au sein des institutions d'enseignement supérieur. Mais cette opération ne peut pas se faire si on ne se donne pas des moyens et des objectifs clairs. Je pense qu'il y a beaucoup d'initiatives qui sont en train d'être déployées en Afrique. Mais je pense qu'il est important qu'on revienne à l'objectif global. Qu'est-ce que nous cherchons? Ça, c'est fondamental. Une fois que nous identifions clairement l'objectif à atteindre par les différents pays, par les différentes communautés, il a cité l'UICA, on a le CAMES chez nous, Sarwa, etc. Je pense que ce sera beaucoup plus facile. C'est là où ces instruments continentaux sont importants. Et leur internalisation aussi est fondamentale. C'est ce dialogue politique et technique entre les structures, entre les pays, qui feront que nous aurons un espace qui nous permettra d'aller vers le développement de la recherche, le développement de l'enseignement supérieur. Je vais citer quelques initiatives au niveau des pays, au niveau des sous-régions, qui militent dans le développement de cette harmonisation au niveau de l'assurance qualité. Et cette harmonisation va instaurer la confiance, mais surtout la transparence pour ce qui concerne les reconnaissances. Et nous savons que la difficulté majeure pour les reconnaissances mutuelles, c'est que nous manquons d'informations fiables sur les autres systèmes. Parfois même, nous méconnaissons les systèmes lusophones par rapport aux systèmes francophones, arabophones, lusophones, etc. Donc, vous voyez, il y a plusieurs zones linguistiques et il est important que nous parlons le même langage. Et ça, c'est fondamental si nous voulons construire cette Afrique où toutes les ressources seront mutualisées. Et je pense que, de ce point de vue, il est important qu'on fasse la promotion de ces instruments, mais aussi de ces outils. Si je prends l'exemple du projet AQUA, parmi d'autres, c'est un projet qui a aidé à mettre en place ces AEG, mais surtout à faire de ces AEG un moyen de travail entre les agences. Présentement, nous avons un projet sur 18 pays. 6 pays francophones, les 6 pays de l'UICA, 6 pays lusophones, dans lesquels les agences nationales dialoguent entre elles pour arriver à cette compréhension mutuelle. Et je vous assure que le rapport que nous avons produit à partir de ces différents réseaux, qui est le RAFANAC, le réseau africain francophone des agences nationales d'assurance qualité, qui regroupe l'ensemble des pays francophones, l'IACAN, qui regroupe les agences donc, de l'Afrique de l'Est appartenant à l'UICA, et la partie lusophone pilotée par le CANAC, donne des résultats extraordinaires en termes de confiance mutuelle. Pour la première fois, nous travaillons entre zones linguistiques différentes, mais pour un même objectif, et je vous assure que les résultats sont très surprenants. En réalité, la langue n'est pas en soi une barrière. Ce qui est une barrière fondamentalement, c'est le manque de communication et le manque de cadre objectif qui nous permet de travailler ensemble. Et là, je pense que c'est essentiel, même au niveau de la recherche. À travers ce projet, nous avons identifié d'autres pistes de travail à travers les centres de recherche, à travers les centres d'excellence, à travers d'autres structures connexes avec qui nous travaillons et pour lesquelles, donc, sans ce mécanisme d'harmonisation, sans ce mécanisme donc, de travail ensemble, on aurait du mal à aller vers cet objectif commun que nous voulons ensemble, c'est-à-dire que construire une Afrique où la mobilité professionnelle et académique sera une réalité. Au-delà des décisions politiques, que ce soit une réalité, qu'un diplômé du Sénégal puisse travailler à Maurice, qu'un diplômé de Maurice puisse travailler à Malawi, etc. Et c'est ce que nous voulons. Et nous pensons que l'assurance qualité est un des outils importants à développer par l'ensemble des pays pour arriver donc à cet objectif. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Abdou. Je vois des mains qui se lèvent, mais on n'a pas beaucoup de temps. Et définitivement, c'est un langage commun, le langage des données. We all lack data on our different qualifications in our country. So when we're talking about exchange and mobility, one of the steps behind policies, etc., would be to have the appropriate data, national information centers, etc., so that we can exchange. Okay, I'm told that I have to finish in 3 minutes, and I have now to give the floor to Dr. Lucy Hedy, who is from the Education for Sustainable Africa. She would present herself, and since she would be the speaker that intervenes the last, I'll give her the freedom to choose the question or the topic on which she wants to talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'm Lucy Hedy from Education Sub-Saharan Africa, and I might talk on the topic that I was prepared to talk about, which is relationship between higher education and private sector. And so these are lessons from work we've been doing with an innovative group of universities called the Education Collaborative, which is led by Ashesi University in Ghana and Kepler in Rwanda. And we have been working in partnership with them to look at what is the evidence for effective relationships between universities and private sector for the benefit of youth employment. But what comes out is very interesting, I think, in terms of this financing question. And where is money going to come from? Because I think often universities think, aha, private sector, this could be an alternative model for financing. So what we found is that there's typically 4 models for engagement between universities and the private sector. The first is around education and training, where young people will have internships, work experience with a particular employer. A great example of that is Isuzu Motors with Nelson Mandela University in South Africa, where young people do mini research projects working on questions that are relevant to industry. So they're picking up skills, learning how industry works. The second is around research. So jointly building up research facilities, capacity, having interchange of staff and equipment. And a really lovely example of that related to COVID-19 is the partnership between Kwame Nkrumah University in Ghana and Incas Diagnostics, and they together rapidly developed COVID-19 testing facilities. The third is around services and consulting, and this is actually the private sector coming in to help universities, assisting them in developing, modernising curriculum, making sure that what they're teaching is designed with industry needs in mind. And the fourth is sponsorships. So that is scholarships, financial support for infrastructure, and so on. And we see quite a few private sector actors, can think of Unilever, for example, in Ghana, who are providing scholarships typically on the scale of maybe 10 per year to universities for students to study there. And I know I don't have much time, so I'll be quick. Just say the reflection there is that these kind of relationships are often small scale, and the sustainability is highly variable. So while it's a very useful part of the mix, and certainly something that should be built upon, it's not a basis on which big institutions like public universities can take meaningful decisions on the kind of transformation that we've been talking about here. That they don't have that kind of long-term reliability without visible, recognizable investment from the government that industry knows that they are going to be piggybacking on. These kind of partnerships, sometimes they do actually, with particular institutions, go to scale, and that's when you find genuine mutual respect for each other's strengths. We found private sector is often very wary when they're approached by universities that they're just seen as a cash cow, and there isn't necessarily the attempt to build up a relationship based on the strengths of industry and what that industry can offer. And we've seen a lot of early relationships founder on the kind of discomfort of an industry player that they're just being seen as a source of money. So I think the challenge for universities is the bandwidth to develop real partnerships with the private sector. We know how stretched administrative staff, teaching staff, research staff are in universities. They barely have time to fulfill their existing commitments. To be able to then, on top of that, be developing meaningful relationships and new partnerships that are going to bring money in is a real challenge. And well, I feel like I should be ending on a positive note because I'm the last person talking. So it is possible, but it really requires investment, and it's not to be taken casually. So the private sector, they need strong relationship management, and they need a signal from government that their investment won't be wasted. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Lucy. I think these were very important ideas, and I would need to say that the government of Mauritius does give 50 African scholarship for Africa, for undergraduate, postgraduate, even PhD degrees in our local universities in Mauritius on a yearly basis. Right, now I have time just for two very quick questions or statements, and then unfortunately we'll have to wrap up. Yeah. Okay, one and one. It's coming.
Thank you very much. Once more, Francis Aduol, Vice Chancellor at the Technical University of Kenya, and Member of Council, Association of Commonwealth Universities. I would like to make remarks in relation to the work of ACU, especially that is relevant to what is happening in the continent of Africa. The Association of Universities, as many of you will know, the Commonwealth Universities, as many of you will know, is one of the oldest associations of universities in the world, created in 2013, and today covers about 500 universities in 50 countries plus. It is largely responsible for three main activities: scholarships and fellowships, innovative teaching, and cooperative research. And I will give three examples only that are relevant to this continent. In respect of scholarships, the Association of Universities, Commonwealth Universities, offers what is known as Queen Elizabeth Commonwealth Scholarships, which is specifically targeted to countries from the developing world. And usually one will propose special postgraduate programs that the university runs, and there is competition from across the world, and you might be able to get 2 or 3 students sponsored to yourselves. This is a very good opportunity for universities that are young and are probably not very able to compete for high-level scholarships. But Queen Elizabeth Scholarship is a very, very strong scholarship, very well funded. Then ACU has been responsible for promoting innovative teaching. One of the very well-known programs is known as PEBL. The chair is very familiar with that. It is called Partnership for Enhanced Blended Learning. It started in 2016. It's as a means of enhancing access to students to be able to access the university without necessarily going there. It is a virtual teaching platform. In East Africa, it benefited 23 universities based at Makerere University, and recently the Australian government supported a similar program for West African universities, and already there are 12 universities benefiting from this. The power of PEBL was actually particularly realized during COVID, that those universities that had gone through this training were able to run programs on this platform even during COVID. And finally, there is a program known as CIRCLE. This is Climate Impact Research, Capacity and Leadership. This is also targeting largely developing countries. And in East Africa, or Africa alone, actually Africa, there are already about 20 countries that are participating in this project, funded through ACU, and it funds universities and also funds individual researchers who focus on climate change issues. Obviously, there are many other things that one could say about ACU, but I thought that I could bring this to the attention of this forum because I consider them to be very relevant to what is happening in Africa today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for mentioning the Pebble project. Actually, it is funded by ACU. Ms. Beth Burton is here. And the quality assurance of blended learning was done by the Commonwealth of Learning by myself when I was working there. And now I'm leading the one for Nigeria and Ghana. It's a very successful project. Thank you. Yamal, I think you have 2 minutes to have your question, 30 seconds, and then 2 minutes for people to respond.
2 minutes becomes 30 seconds. I like it. So a quick question, I guess. Government of Mauritius has a very clearly articulated vision to become a knowledge hub. Up to now, we are a bit more, when you look at the literature of Jane Knight, Marginson, Scott, etc., we are more of a student hub. I'm thinking when I'm listening to all the panelists talk about mobility, talk about the different instruments that exist at the level of the ratifications, etc., could this not be one of the missing links that could actually facilitate us not only becoming more of a student hub, but also transforming to becoming a knowledge hub? So this is my sort of open question, because how do we move from here?
Right. We gave you 30 seconds because I'm going to give 30 seconds to each panelist to respond to your question, and then we'll wrap up. Who wants to start first? Okay. My neighbor, Mr. Ogutu, wants to start.
Yes, and mine is straightforward. I'm wondering, my brother from Senegal talked about lack of a framework of communication to enable us to work together. And I thought ADEA has basically brought us for this. Where is ADEA in this, and what is it doing about putting in place a framework of communication to enhance our collaboration, especially in the higher education space? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to address quickly the question that my colleague Yamal has said. Mauritius is an education hub in the making, which means that we still have to learn from all our colleagues, all our partners, but we have set the foundation stones. For example, like you're aware, we have already ratified the ADEA Convention for the mobility of knowledge and for mobility of personnel. At the same time, we have had the mapping of the National Qualifications Framework with the SADC Qualification Framework. Again, the reason behind that is to allow for that mobility of qualifications so that whoever has done, let's say, an exit secondary school qualifications in any of the SADC countries would be allowed to come over and enhance this concept of the education hub. We also have, and we discussed this yesterday with IIEP, the pathways for education. And this is where your institution comes in, because Polytechnic was to be there and fill the gap of those students who finished secondary schooling but did not meet the entry requirement to join university. So create pathways, and this pathway would not be just for Mauritian students, but should also be a pathways for all other international students to join in. And this is why it is interesting, especially for Polytechnic, because you have this collaboration with international partners like La Trobe. See, I'm doing marketing for you now, for La Trobe, and we can have students from any part of the world coming over, doing the diploma at Polytechnic, and then moving on to go somewhere else and complete La Trobe in this case. So it is an education hub in the making, but we have to keep on improving on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Je voulais partager avec vous un peu des éléments qui sont ressortis des évaluations des écoles doctorales et de la recherche au Sénégal sur le lien recherche et monde socio-économique ou industrie. Deux facteurs principaux sont sortis pour expliquer un peu ce faible lien. Le premier, c'est que l'ensemble des entreprises qui sont dans nos pays sont des multinationales et que leur recherche se fait en dehors du continent. L'autre élément qui est ressorti et qui est très intéressant et qui va dans le sens que le professeur avait dit ce matin quand il parlait de la recherche en partant de l'école primaire, de l'éducation de base. Ce qui s'est passé, c'est que les entrepreneurs locaux, généralement, qui ont les ressources financières qui permettent d'aller vers le financement de la recherche, malheureusement n'ont pas un niveau d'éducation très élevé. Donc ils ne savent pas, parce que c'est de l'informel, ils ne savent pas un peu l'apport que la recherche pourrait avoir sur leur business. Le contraire se trouve dans les technologies. Dans les nouvelles technologies, les jeunes entrepreneurs, c'est des personnes qui sont éduquées et ils sont promptes à aller vers l'université et il y a plus de startups. Donc vous voyez le link entre l'école, l'éducation de base, tout est holistique. Je pense que la réflexion doit être globale et que c'est l'éducation de façon générale et la formation qu'on doit appréhender, qu'on doit adresser pour trouver la solution à tous ces problèmes d'enseignement supérieur et de recherche et de link entre la recherche et le monde économique. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Dr. Lucy?
Thank you. I'll be as brief as possible. Just to reflect that academia in Africa faces a crisis of recruitment and retention of faculty, and internationalization is a real makes it much more appealing career for people. So creating centres where there's an international environment, you're learning from people across the continent, is certainly something that's going to help address this continent-wide faculty crisis. And secondly, I would like to urge you, if you do set up this centre, to advertise the posts at this centre at the African Education Jobs Board, which is a collaboration between the Association of African Universities, ESSA, and the Warwick Employment Group. It's a pan-African jobs board advertising academic jobs across the continent. If you go on there, there's at any one time about 300 academic jobs available. So go to edujobs.africa.org. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't think we have more time. It's already 7 o'clock. But it was really nice to have this very inspiring and interesting conversation, especially at the end of the day, a long day. I was really very, very worried and very stressed, but it went very well. I thank all the audience to be here and to really collaborate with us, and a big round of applause for our experts and panelists for having kept us alive. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Professor Bajan, do you have a housekeeping to say where do we meet? Because actually, if some of you are not aware, it's not in this hotel. The dinner,
Yes.
the names are same, Le Méridien Maritime, but they are two different hotels.
So,
Yeah,
housekeeping rule,
please go
Chair,
ahead.
is that there will be a bus that is going to pick all the delegates from outside here, and will drive us to the venue, which is about 10 minutes drive from here. It's not far. It's already going. All right, all right.
Is
so,
that- okay.
so one bus has gone. So run, and we'll catch the next bus.
Will there be a next bus? Okay. Yes,